My name is Margaret Whitaker, and I am 68 years old. 3 hours after my hip replacement surgery, I woke up in a hospital bed in Asheville, North Carolina, with a dry throat, a burning pain down my left side, and one question on my lips. Is my son here yet? The nurse looked at the empty chair beside my bed. Then she looked at me. That was the moment I knew. Brandon had promised me he would be there. My only child. My son. The boy I raised alone through fevers, football injuries, college tuition, and every broken promise he ever made with tears in his eyes. He had stood beside my hospital bed that morning, kissed my forehead, and said, "Mom, don't worry. I'll take you home. I'll stay with you the first few nights." I believed him. A mother always believes the version of her child she raised, even when the grown man standing in front of her has spent years proving he became someone else. By noon, he wasn't there. By 2, the nurse had called him 4 times. By 3, my phone lit up with one text message. Something came up. "Kelsey and I are in Charlotte. Just call an Uber." I read those words until they blurred. Just call an Uber. I had a fresh surgical incision, a walker waiting beside the bed, and a doctor's order saying I could not be left alone for 72 hours. I couldn't bend. I couldn't drive. I couldn't even stand without someone holding my elbow. But my son, the man who had already asked me twice whether I planned to keep the house in the family, thought I could climb into a stranger's car and figure it out. The nurse was furious. I was ashamed. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because strangers had just witnessed the truth I had spent years hiding. My son did not come when I needed him. He came when he needed me. 3 days later, I was home, lying in a recliner with my pain medication out of reach, when I saw Brandon's Facebook post. He and his wife were smiling over steaks and wine. The caption read, "Finally taking time for ourselves. Big things coming." Underneath it, Brandon had commented, "Mom's recovering great, tougher than she looks." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Arthur Bell, the lawyer who had written my husband's will 20 years earlier. "Arthur," I said, my voice still rough from the breathing tube, "I need to change my will." He went quiet. "Margaret, are you sure?" I looked at the empty room, at the walker, at the framed photo of my late husband on the mantel, at the son who had left me alone after surgery, then lied about it in public. "Yes," I said, "and this time I want to leave everything to the people who actually showed up." Before my surgery, I used to tell people Brandon was busy. That was the word I chose. Busy. It sounded kinder than selfish. It sounded temporary. It made him seem like a man with responsibilities instead of a son who had learned exactly how little effort he could give and still be called good. My late husband, Henry, used to see it more clearly than I did. "He calls when he needs something," Henry told me once, standing at the kitchen sink with a dish towel over his shoulder. "You know that, right?" I had been packing leftovers into a container for Brandon to take home. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and the apple cake he liked as a boy. "He's under pressure," I said. Henry looked at me with the tired patience of a man who loved me too much to argue with the lie I needed. "Margaret," he said quietly, "every grown man is under pressure. Not every grown man treats his mother like a bank with a birthday." I remember laughing then, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I might have had to admit he was right. That was 6 years before Henry died. After that, Brandon became the only family I had left in Asheville, or at least that was what I told myself. I had neighbors, former co-workers from the hospital, women from church, people who brought casseroles after the funeral and still waved when I checked the mailbox. But Brandon was blood. Brandon was my son. And when you are a mother, blood can feel like a contract you signed before you understood the terms. He was 41 years old, a real estate agent with expensive shoes, perfect hair, and a habit of checking his phone while other people were still speaking. His wife, Kelsey, was beautiful in a sharp kind of way, all white nails and gold jewelry and smiles that never reached her eyes. Together, they looked successful. That was their talent. Looking successful. Being successful was something else entirely. The first time Brandon asked for money after Henry passed, it was $5,000. "Just a short-term cash flow issue," he said, sitting across from me at my dining table. "I've got a commission closing next month." I wrote the check. The second time it was $12,000. The third time, he didn't call it borrowing. He called it moving money around inside the family. Mom, eventually everything comes back to me anyway, he said like he was discussing the weather. I should have stopped him there. Instead, I stared into my coffee and said, Brandon, I'm not dead. He laughed. God, Mom, don't be dramatic. You know what I mean. Yes, I knew exactly what he meant. He meant the house Henry and I had paid off after 32 years of mortgage payments. He meant the investment account Henry had built slowly, carefully, one paycheck at a time. He meant the little lake property near Lake Lure that Henry bought back when nobody wanted land that far out. He meant my savings, my furniture, my jewelry box, even the silver serving tray his grandmother left me. He meant my life, but only after I was done using it. 2 weeks before my surgery, Brandon came over for Sunday dinner with Kelsey and their daughter Lily. Lily was 14 then, sweet and quiet, with Henry's gray eyes and my habit of apologizing when someone else bumped into her. She helped me set the table while Brandon stood in the living room talking loudly into his phone about a client from Charlotte. Kelsey drifted through my kitchen, opening cabinets like she was inspecting a rental. You still haven't changed these? She asked, touching the brass handles Henry had installed himself. I like them, I said. They make the house look old. It is old. She smiled without warmth. That's not always a selling point. I looked at her then. Selling? She blinked once, just once, but it was enough. Before I could ask what she meant, Brandon ended his call and clapped his hands together. Smells amazing, Mom. Dinner was roast chicken, carrots, biscuits, and the kind of careful peace I had spent years arranging around my son's moods. Halfway through, I mentioned the surgery. The doctor says I'll need someone with me for at least the first few days, I said. Not forever, just until I can get around safely. Brandon reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Of course, I'll be there. Kelsey looked up sharply. Brandon, we have Charlotte that week. He didn't look at her. I said I'll handle it. For one foolish second, I felt relieved, proud even. My son had chosen me. Maybe Henry had been wrong. Maybe I had been too hard on Brandon in my private thoughts. Maybe when it truly mattered, he would remember who had stayed up through his fevers, who had packed his lunches, who had sold her mother's pearl earrings to cover his freshman tuition. Then I stood to get dessert. In the kitchen, with one hand on the refrigerator door, I heard Kelsey whisper, You better not let this surgery ruin the Charlotte deal. And Brandon whispered back, Relax, she'll be fine. She always is. I stood there with the apple pie in my hands, listening to the sentence settle into me. She'll be fine. She always is. That night, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at Henry's empty chair. I wanted to call Brandon and ask him if he really meant it. I wanted to ask if I was his mother or just another inconvenience he planned to work around. But I didn't. Because some part of me still wanted to believe that love did not need to be begged for. So I went to bed telling myself that my son would come, and for the last time in my life, I believed him. The morning of my surgery, Brandon drove me to Mission Hospital in the dark. It was still early enough that Asheville looked half asleep, the mountains black against a pale blue sky, the streetlights glowing over empty roads. I sat in the passenger seat with my overnight bag on my lap, trying not to notice how fast Brandon was driving or how often his phone lit up in the cup holder. Every few minutes, it buzzed. Kelsey, Charlotte client. Kelsey again. I pretended not to see the names flashing across the screen. That was another thing I had learned to do as Brandon's mother. Pretend not to see. Pretend not to hear. Pretend every small disappointment was too small to name, until one day you looked up and realized you had built an entire relationship out of things you were not allowed to mention. You don't have to stay the whole time, I said as we pulled into the hospital parking garage. Once they take me back, you can get coffee or answer emails. Brandon gave me the kind of smile people use when they want credit for being patient. Mom, stop. I told you I'm here. I wanted to believe the sentence more than I wanted to breathe. Inside, everything smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic. A nurse checked me in, gave me a wristband, and asked who would be taking me home after the procedure. My son, I said. Brandon looked up from his phone just long enough to nod. Yes, ma'am, I'll be here. The nurse wrote his name down. There it was in ink, Brandon Whitaker. Emergency contact, responsible adult, my ride home, my son. Before they wheeled me away, Brandon leaned down and kissed my forehead. His aftershave smelled expensive and unfamiliar. "You're gonna do great," he said. "Promise me you'll be here when I wake up." For a second, his face softened. Or maybe I invented that part later because I needed one gentle thing to remember. "I promise, Mom." Then the doors opened, and they took me away. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia pulled me under was the ceiling lights passing overhead, one after another, like white moons. I remember thinking of Henry. I remember wishing his hand was the one holding mine. Henry would have brought a thermos of coffee, a paperback novel, and one of those yellow legal pads he used to make lists on. Henry would have irritated every nurse in the building, asking when he could see me. Henry would have stayed. When I woke up, the world came back in pieces. A beeping monitor, a heavy blanket, a dry tongue, pain, deep and hot, cutting through my hip and down my leg, and the empty chair beside my bed. At first, I didn't panic. Surgery takes time. Recovery takes time. People step out. People get lunch. People miss the first few minutes after you wake up. The nurse, Hannah, smiled when she saw my eyes open. "Welcome back, Mrs. Whitaker." "My son," I whispered. "Is he here?" Her smile hesitated. "Not yet, but we called him." Not yet. Two small words can hold a lot of mercy when you are still willing to believe in them. At noon, he had not arrived. At 1, Hannah called again. I watched her stand near the doorway with my chart tucked against her chest, listening to his voicemail greeting. Her face changed, not much, just enough. By 2, I stopped asking. By 3, my phone buzzed on the rolling tray beside my bed. Hannah handed it to me carefully. One text. Something came up. "Kelsey and I are in Charlotte. Just call an Uber. I'll check on you tomorrow." I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, because surely I had missed something. Surely there was another message coming. An apology. An explanation. A sentence that began with, "I'm so sorry, Mom." But there was nothing. Just call an Uber. My incision burned under the bandage. My left hand trembled around the phone. I became suddenly, painfully aware of Hannah standing beside me, trying not to read the screen and reading it anyway. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said carefully, "you cannot leave here alone." I looked away. "He's busy." The excuse came out automatically, smooth from years of use. Hannah's voice lowered. "Busy is not the same as allowed to abandon you after surgery." The word abandon made my eyes fill. I hated that. I hated crying in front of strangers. I had spent 38 years as a nurse teaching patients how to keep their dignity in paper gowns. And there I was, 70% anesthesia, 30% humiliation, holding a phone that proved my only child had decided I was inconvenient. "I can call someone else," Hannah said. "There isn't anyone else." The lie was old. I had said it so many times that it felt true. Then I thought of Denise Walker. Denise lived 2 houses down from me in a small blue bungalow with white shutters and wind chimes on the porch. Years earlier, I had been her nurse after her husband's stroke. After Henry died, she started checking on me without making it feel like pity. She brought soup in mason jars. She changed light bulbs. She sat with me on the porch when the house felt too quiet. But Denise was not family. That was what I told myself as Hannah dialed her number. Denise answered on the second ring. Hannah explained the situation in a professional voice. She did not say my son left me. She said my original transportation was no longer available. There was a pause. Then Hannah looked at me. She says she's on her way. Denise arrived 34 minutes later wearing jeans, a faded cardigan, and the expression of a woman who had already decided who she was angry with. She signed the discharge paperwork. She listened to the instructions. She asked questions Brandon would not have known to ask. How often for the pain medication? Could I climb stairs? Was the bathroom safe? What symptoms meant an emergency? When she finally turned to me, her voice softened. "Let's get you home, Margaret." I wanted to thank her. Instead, I started crying. Denise did not tell me to stop. She just put one hand over mine and said, "You don't have to defend him today." But I did. Even then, some foolish, loyal part of me still did. "He had a work thing," I whispered. Denise looked at the empty hallway, then back at me. "No," she said, "he made a choice." And as she wheeled me out of the hospital, past the waiting room full of families who had stayed, I finally understood that the worst pain from surgery was not in my hip. It was realizing that my son had known exactly how helpless I would be. and he had left anyway. Denise brought me home just before sunset. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. White porch railings, hydrangeas gone brown from the early October cold, Henry's old brass mailbox leaning slightly to the left because he had always meant to fix it, and never did. For one foolish second, I thought stepping through my front door would make everything feel normal again. Then Denise opened the door and switched on the hallway light. Nothing was ready. The throw rug was still bunched near the entryway, exactly where the discharge nurse had warned me rugs could make me fall. The stairs were bare and steep. The downstairs powder room had no raised toilet seat, no safety rail, no non-slip mat. The refrigerator held half a carton of orange juice, a jar of mustard, and 3 eggs. My prescription bag was not on the counter because Brandon had never picked it up. Denise stood in the kitchen, one hand on her hip, looking around with a silence that said more than shouting ever could. "He told me he'd handle it," I said. My voice sounded small in my own house. Denise opened a cabinet and took down a glass. "I know what he told you." She filled it with water, brought it to me, then helped me lower myself into the recliner in the living room. The pain medication from the hospital was wearing off. Every movement felt like someone had placed a hot wire inside my hip and pulled it tight. "I can call him," I said, even though I did not want to hear his voice. Denise looked at me. Margaret. Just my name. Nothing else. But somehow it carried all the things she was too kind to say. I called anyway. Brandon answered on the 5th ring. In the background I heard music, laughter, the clink of dishes. A restaurant, not a meeting, not an emergency. A restaurant. "Mom, I can't really talk right now." "Brandon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you didn't pick up my medication." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I thought they gave you something at the hospital." "They gave me 1 dose. I need the prescription." "Okay, well, can Denise get it?" I closed my eyes. "You told me you would be here." I said something came up. "I just had surgery." His voice lowered, irritated now. "Mom, you're not dying." Denise heard it. I knew because her face changed. It was not anger exactly. It was recognition. The kind a woman gets when she sees the truth walk into a room and take off its coat. I held the phone against my ear, waiting for Brandon to hear himself. Waiting for him to soften. Waiting for the boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms to come back through the line and say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll be there soon." He did not. Instead, he said, "Look, Kelsey and I are in the middle of something important. I'll stop by tomorrow if I can." If I can. 3 words. That was what 38 hours of labor, 14 years of school lunches, 1 sold wedding ring, and 41 years of motherhood had earned me. "If you can," I repeated. He missed the warning in my voice because Brandon had never listened closely when I spoke. "Yeah, get some rest. You always bounce back." Then he hung up. For a long moment the room did not move. The lamp beside Henry's chair gave off a yellow circle of light. The television was dark. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust. I could hear Denise breathing through her nose, slow and controlled. Finally, she took the phone gently from my hand. "I'm going to get your medication," she said. "Then I'm coming back with soup, a shower chair, and whatever else that hospital list says you need." "You don't have to do that." "I know." She put on her coat. "That's why it matters." After she left, I sat alone in the recliner with my walker beside me and my pain blooming sharper by the minute. I looked at the framed photograph on the mantel. Henry in his navy sweater, one hand tucked into his pocket, smiling like he knew some private joke the rest of the world had missed. "You were right," I whispered. Saying it out loud broke something open. Not loudly, not dramatically. There was no screaming, no sobbing into a pillow. Just one quiet crack inside my chest, clean and permanent. By the time Denise returned, it was dark. She carried 3 pharmacy bags, a container of chicken soup, a raised toilet seat, and a shower chair she said she borrowed from church storage. She had also brought a small notebook. "What's that?" I asked. "A schedule," she said. "Pain medication, blood thinner, physical therapy exercises, meals. If Brandon won't keep track, we will." I looked at her then. Denise Walker was not my daughter. She was not my sister. She was not bound to me by blood marriage law or obligation. She was a neighbor with her own bills, her own sore knees, her own lonely house 2 doors down. And yet she was there. She helped me take the first dose of medication. She warmed the soup. She placed a bell on the side table in case I needed her while she was in the kitchen. She folded a blanket over my legs without making me feel helpless. That night, around 11, I woke from a thin, painful sleep and saw her sitting in Henry's chair, glasses low on her nose, reading the discharge papers under the lamp. She had set an alarm on her phone for my next dose. For the first time since the hospital, I cried without trying to hide it. Denise looked up. "Pain bad?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I think I'm just finally seeing things clearly." She did not ask what I meant. She did not need to. The next morning, Brandon texted at 9:17. "How are you feeling?" I stared at the message. Then another came through. "Also, when you're better, we need to talk about the house. Kelsey thinks it might be time to make a plan." There it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I should have been there." Not, "Do you need anything?" The house. I set the phone face down on the side table and looked toward the hallway where Henry's old roll-top desk sat locked beneath the family photographs. Inside that desk was my will. The old one. The one that left almost everything to Brandon. For the first time, I did not feel comforted by that. I felt ashamed of it. Arthur Bell had been our family lawyer since before Brandon was born. He was 70 years old, tall and thin, with silver hair combed neatly to one side and the kind of voice that made people sit straighter without knowing why. He had drawn up Henry's will. He had handled the title transfer on our house after Henry died. He had explained probate to me with a patience I did not deserve, because I spent most of that meeting staring at my wedding ring instead of listening. When I called him that Thursday morning, he answered on the third ring. "Margaret," he said, "how are you recovering?" I looked at the walker beside my recliner, at the pill bottles lined up by Denise's careful hand, at my phone still face down after Brandon's message about the house. "I'm recovering from more than surgery." Arthur went quiet. Lawyers hear sentences like that differently from other people. They hear the document underneath the pain. "What do you need?" "I need to change my will." Another pause. Then his voice became very careful. "Is Brandon there with you?" "No." "Is anyone pressuring you to make this change?" "No." "Are you taking pain medication right now?" I almost laughed. "Yes, Arthur. I had my hip replaced 3 days ago." "Then I'll need your physician to confirm capacity before we execute anything. I'm not questioning you, Margaret. I'm protecting you." Protecting me. The word landed strangely. For years, I had thought protecting my family meant keeping the peace, swallowing disappointment, pretending not to notice when Brandon treated my future like his inheritance had already been delivered. Now Arthur was telling me protection might mean paperwork. He came to the house the next afternoon. Denise helped me wash my face, brush my hair, and move to the dining table before he arrived. I told her she did not need to stay. She said, "I'll be in the kitchen unless you want me gone." I did not want her gone. Arthur brought a leather briefcase, a yellow legal pad, and no small talk. He sat across from me at the dining table Henry had refinished by hand the year Brandon graduated high school. "Before we discuss distribution," Arthur said, clicking his pen, "I need you to tell me why." I folded my hands together to hide the tremor. "Because my son left me at the hospital after surgery and told me to call an Uber." Arthur's pen stopped moving. For the first time in all the years I had known him, he looked genuinely stunned. "He did what?" I picked up my phone and opened the text. Something came up. "Kelsey and I are in Charlotte. Just call an Uber." Arthur read it once. Then again. He did not comment. He simply took out his own phone, photographed the screen with my permission, and wrote something on his pad. What else? That was the question that broke the dam. I told him about the calls Brandon did not answer, the medication he did not pick up, the house he wanted to discuss before he asked if I could walk, the brochures for assisted living he had brought months earlier and pretended were just options. The way Kelsey had said my kitchen cabinets were not a selling point. The way Brandon had started saying when we sell instead of if you sell. Arthur wrote it all down. When I finished, my throat felt raw. "I don't want to be cruel," I said. Arthur looked up. "Margaret, choosing not to reward cruelty is not the same thing as being cruel." That sentence stayed with me. We began with the old will. Arthur read the main provisions aloud, though I already knew them. Brandon received the house. Brandon received the Lake Lure property. Brandon received the majority of my investment accounts. Brandon was named executor. Brandon was given authority over my personal belongings. Hearing it spoken out loud was different from knowing it on paper. It sounded less like a will and more like a surrender. "I wrote that when Henry was alive," I said softly. "Back then, I thought Brandon would grow up eventually." Arthur's expression did not change. "Some people grow older, Margaret. That isn't always the same thing." I looked toward the kitchen. Denise was pretending not to listen while rinsing a mug that had already been clean. She had spent the morning helping me lift my leg onto an ottoman. She had counted my pills. She had argued with the pharmacy when one prescription was delayed. She had done all of it without asking for anything except permission to help. "Can I leave something to Denise?" Arthur nodded. "You can leave your estate to whomever you choose, provided you are of sound mind and not under undue influence." "She hasn't influenced me." "I believe you, but Brandon may claim otherwise." "Then we prepare for that." Arthur gave me the smallest smile. "There she is." We built the new will piece by piece. The house would not go to Brandon. It would go into a trust for Lily, my granddaughter, until she turned 25. Not because Brandon deserved to benefit through her, but because Lily was innocent, and I would not punish a child for her father's emptiness. The Lake Lure property would fund a recovery grant for elderly patients discharged after surgery without proper family support. Arthur raised an eyebrow when I said that. "That is very specific." So was what happened to me. Denise would receive the cottage behind my house if she wanted it, and a portion of my investment account. Brandon would receive $1. Arthur looked at me over his glasses. "You understand why we do that. So he can't say I forgot him." "Exactly." I swallowed. "I did not forget him, Arthur." "I know. That's the worst part." By the time we finished, the late afternoon sun had stretched across the dining room floor. Arthur gathered his papers and stood. "I'll have your doctor evaluate capacity. Then we execute with witnesses. Until then, do not tell Brandon." I almost smiled. "For once," I said, "Brandon is not going to know what belongs to him before I do." Arthur paused at the door. "Margaret, when he finds out, he will not be angry because you changed your will." I looked at him. "He'll be angry because he thought your love was legally binding." After Arthur left, I sat at the table for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and read Brandon's message again. "When you're better, we need to talk about the house." This time I answered, "No, Brandon, we don't." For the first time in days, my hands did not shake when I hit send. Brandon found out faster than Arthur expected. He did not find out because I told him. He found out because men, like my son, always have one hand on the door of a room they are not supposed to enter. 2 days after Arthur visited, Brandon showed up at my house without calling. I heard his car before I saw him, that low-expensive engine rolling into my driveway like it owned the gravel. Denise was in the kitchen making tea. I was in the recliner with my leg elevated, trying to read a mystery novel and failing because the same paragraph kept repeating itself in my mind. "No, Brandon, we don't." That was the text I had sent him. He had not answered it. Now he was at my front door. He let himself in with the spare key I had never thought to take back. "Mom?" His voice was too loud, too cheerful. The kind of voice people use when they are already angry, but still pretending there is a polite version of what comes next. "In here," I said. He walked into the living room wearing a gray blazer, dark jeans, and the smile he used on clients who did not know him yet. Kelsey was behind him, carrying a leather folder against her chest. Her eyes went straight to Denise. "Oh," Kelsey said, "you're here again." Denise set the kettle down. "I am." Brandon looked from her to me. "Can we have a family conversation in private?" I reached for the blanket over my knees and smoothed it once. "Denise can stay." His jaw tightened. "She's not family." I looked at him for a long second. "She picked up my medication." That landed. Not hard enough to stop him, but hard enough to make him blink. Kelsey stepped forward before he could speak. "Margaret, we're concerned. Really concerned. You're recovering, you're on medication, and now we hear Arthur Bell has been here discussing legal documents." I did not ask how they had heard. In Asheville, a lawyer's car in the driveway was apparently still a community event. Brandon sat on the edge of Henry's old chair without permission. "Mom, I need you to tell me exactly what you signed." "I haven't signed anything yet." Relief moved across his face so quickly it would have been funny if it had not hurt so much. "Good," he said. "Good. Then we can slow down." "We?" He ignored that. "I know you're upset about the hospital. I should have handled it better." That was not an apology. That was a press release. I waited. He glanced at Kelsey, then back at me. "But making big decisions while you're emotional isn't wise. Dad would have said the same thing." The room changed when he said Henry's name. Denise went still in the kitchen. Kelsey looked down at her folder, and I felt something inside me sharpen. "Do not use your father to make your argument," I said. Brandon leaned back, wounded now. He was good at wounded. He could put it on like a sweater. "I'm not using Dad. I'm trying to protect what he built." "What did he build, Brandon?" His eyes flashed. "This house, the Lake Lure property, the accounts, the family legacy." There it was again. Legacy. A word people reach for when they want your property but not your pain. Kelsey opened the folder and pulled out a brochure I had seen before. A private assisted living facility 40 minutes outside Asheville. Pale blue walls, smiling nurses, a courtyard full of people pretending not to be lonely. "We just think," she said carefully, "that it's time to make a plan." I looked at the brochure. "You brought this to a woman who came home from surgery 3 days ago." Brandon sighed. "Mom, don't make it ugly." I laughed then, one short sound dry as dust. "Ugly?" His face hardened. "I left for one business trip. You left me at a hospital. And Denise came. You were fine." Fine. There it was, the word he had always used to erase whatever he did not want to carry. I looked at my son and saw not the boy with fever-red cheeks clutching my hand, but the man who had learned that if I survived something, he did not have to feel guilty for putting me through it. "You don't get to decide how abandoned I felt," I said. Kelsey folded her arms. "No one abandoned you, Margaret. You're being influenced." Denise stepped into the living room. "Careful." Kelsey turned. "Excuse me?" I said careful, Denise repeated. "You are standing in this woman's house after your husband left her alone after major surgery, accusing the only person who showed up of manipulation. Choose your next words like they might be read in court." The room went silent. Brandon stood. "This is exactly what I mean. She's turning you against me." "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but all three of them looked at me. "No one turned me against you. You left me alone and expected me to turn myself back towards you." For the first time, Brandon had no answer. Then Kelsey made the mistake. She looked around my living room, at Henry's books, the mantel, the staircase, the photographs, the house my husband and I had paid for with decades of work, and said, "This is all going to be Brandon's eventually anyway. Why are we pretending it isn't?" The silence after that was different. It had weight. I picked up my phone from the side table, opened the message Brandon had sent from Charlotte, and held it out. "Read it," I said. Kelsey did not move. Brandon's face went pale around the mouth. "Mom?" "Read it." Denise took the phone gently because my hand had started to shake and read the message aloud. Something came up. "Kelsey and I are in Charlotte. Just call an Uber. I'll check on you tomorrow." Nobody spoke. I looked at my son. That sentence is now part of my legal file. His eyes snapped to mine. "What does that mean?" "It means Arthur has it. My doctor will have it. The witnesses will know about it. And if you ever try to claim I changed my will because I was confused, manipulated, or unstable, that sentence will be read out loud." Kelsey's face changed first. Not sadness, calculation. Brandon whispered, "You wouldn't do that to me." And there it was. After everything, he still believed the worst thing in the room was what I might do to him. I leaned back against the recliner, exhausted but clear. "Brandon," I said, "you already did it to yourself." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up Kelsey's folder, crushed the assisted living brochure in one hand, and walked out. Kelsey followed him. At the door, she turned back. "You'll regret this when you're alone." I looked at Denise standing beside my chair. "I was alone," I said. "That was the point." Kelsey left without another word. And for the first time since Henry died, the house felt quiet in a way that did not scare me. Arthur executed the new will 8 days later. He did not do it quietly, and that was intentional. First, my doctor signed a capacity statement confirming that I was alert, oriented, and fully capable of making legal decisions. Then Arthur brought 2 witnesses who had no connection to my family, a notary from his office, and a small recorder he placed in the center of my dining table. Margaret, he said, state your full name. Margaret Elaine Whitaker. Do you understand what document you are signing today? My last will and testament, along with the trust documents we discussed. Are you signing freely? Yes. Has anyone forced, threatened, pressured, or manipulated you into making these changes? I looked toward the kitchen where Denise was making herself invisible by pretending to rearrange tea bags. No, I said. I am doing this because I finally understand the difference between being loved and being expected. Arthur's pen stopped for half a second. Then he nodded. I signed every page. My hand shook by the end, not from doubt but from pain. The surgery had taken more from me than I wanted to admit. But when Arthur gathered the papers and slid them into his leather folder, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not happy exactly. Free. 3 months later, Brandon filed his first complaint. Not in court. Not yet. He started where cowards often start, with relatives. He called my cousin Marlene in Raleigh and told her Denise had gotten into my head. He told Kelsey's parents I was being isolated. He told people at church that I had changed after surgery, that medication had affected my judgment, that grief over Henry had made me vulnerable. Then he made the mistake of putting it in writing. Mom, you're confused. Everyone can see it. Denise is using you. Arthur should be ashamed of himself. When this goes to court, don't say I didn't warn you. I forwarded the message to Arthur. Arthur replied 11 minutes later. Excellent. Save everything. That was how I learned something very important. People who think they are building a case against you often hand you the bricks for your own wall. By Christmas, I was walking with a cane. Denise and I decorated the house together. Lily came over one Saturday afternoon and helped string lights along the porch. Brandon dropped her off but did not come inside. He sat in the driveway for 6 minutes, engine running, watching through the windshield like a man staring at a locked door he used to think belonged to him. Lily hugged me carefully. Dad says you're mad at him. I touched her hair. I'm disappointed in him. That's not the same thing as being mad. She looked toward the driveway. He says you're giving everything to Mrs. Walker. No, I said. I'm giving things to the people who will take care of them. Lily was quiet. Then she asked, does that include me? My heart hurt so badly I almost couldn't answer. Yes, sweetheart, especially you. I lived 11 more months. Good months, mostly. Not easy, but honest. I healed enough to walk to the porch in the mornings. Denise and I drank coffee under blankets and complained about the squirrels stealing from the bird feeder. Lily came twice a month. I taught her Henry's apple pie recipe, the one Brandon liked but never learned to make. I showed her where her grandfather had carved our initials under the dining table. I told her stories about the house that had nothing to do with money. I also wrote letters. One for Lily, one for Denise, one for Brandon. Arthur kept them with the will. When I died, it was in my own bed under the quilt Henry's mother made, with Denise asleep in the chair beside me and Lily's last drawing on my nightstand. I did not die abandoned. That mattered more than Brandon will ever understand. The will was read 2 weeks later in Arthur's office. Brandon arrived in a black suit, Kelsey beside him. Both of them dressed like grief was a business meeting. Lily sat across from them, twisting a tissue in her hands. Denise sat near the door, as if she still believed she had no right to take up space. Arthur began with the house. The Asheville residence shall be placed into the Whitaker Family Trust for the benefit of Lily Grace Whitaker, to be held until her 25th birthday. The property may not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred by Brandon Whitaker or Kelsey Whitaker. Brandon's face changed. What? Arthur continued. The Lake Lure property shall be liquidated, with proceeds used to establish the Henry and Margaret Whitaker Recovery Fund, supporting elderly patients discharged after major surgery without adequate family care. Kelsey whispered, that land was worth almost $1 million. Arthur looked at her. $940,000 according to the last appraisal. Then he read Denise's portion. The cottage. A lifetime right to live there, a financial gift large enough to keep her safe. Denise began to cry silently. Finally, Arthur turned the page. To my son, Brandon Whitaker, I leave the sum of $1. Brandon stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. No, she wouldn't do that. Arthur opened the final envelope. She left you a letter. He read it aloud. Brandon, I did not remove you from my will because you failed me once. I removed you because that day after surgery showed me the truth of many years. You came when you needed money. You disappeared when I needed help. You called my house your legacy before you remembered it was my home." Arthur's voice remained steady. "You told me to call an Uber when I could not stand alone. So I called the people who actually came. And I left my life's work to the people who understood that love is not something you collect after someone dies. It is something you prove while they are still here." No one spoke. Then Lily, my quiet granddaughter, looked at her father and said, "Dad, Grandma didn't take anything from you. You just weren't there to receive it." That was the last word in the room. Not mine, hers. And somehow that felt right. Brandon contested the will. Arthur expected it. The case lasted less than 3 months. The doctor's statement, the witnesses, the recorded signing, Brandon's own texts, and the hospital discharge records did exactly what truth does when someone finally puts it in order. They held. The judge dismissed his claim. The house stayed with Lily. Denise stayed in the cottage. The recovery fund helped its first patient the following spring, a 72-year-old widower whose daughter lived 3 states away and could not come home after his surgery. As for Brandon, I do not know whether he ever understood. Maybe he told himself I was cruel. Maybe he told himself Denise stole what was his. Maybe he still says I punished him for one bad day. But it was never one bad day. It was one day that finally told the truth. And if there is anything I want you to remember from my story, it is this. Do not leave your life in the hands of someone who only values it after you are gone. A will is not just a list of who gets what. Sometimes it is the last place a quiet woman finally tells the truth out loud.